Start by sharing these two meals. What you see here is two different plates that I made for dinner, but I didn't make two different dinners. And I want to show you how I built that, because this is not just a meal. I'm not just sharing a meal. I'm sharing what you do when you have people in the same household with differing tastes, and you are the person taking care of the meals, and you feel that you need to create two different dinners, especially if the tastes are polar opposites. What I want to share with you is how I built this. It's the same dinner, just two different plates. And I want to share just how you could possibly apply this to your own situation. Now, I know for folks who have particular tastes, maybe somebody in your household is limited, has dietary restrictions, for example, celiac disease, or has an autoimmune condition. One of the things that can happen is either you transform the entire household to eating that particular way, celiac, to accommodate the person with celiac, or two separate types of dinners are created, or meals are created for the person dealing with the situation. It doesn't have to be celiac, could be something else, and for everybody else. Now, one of the things that we want to be mindful of, because this is something I kind of just figured out because I faced this situation where when you have different tastes in your household, the tendency is to think that everybody is going to want the same exact plate. But what happens when you have polar opposite tastes, then you can think that in order to satisfy everybody, you have to make different meals. And then what can happen is you find yourself resenting the process, because in making two different meals, that's two different type of work, and it can become more exhausting, and you might not want that. No, it's ideal if everybody had the same taste, and so you could make the same exact dinner, everybody have the same exact plate. But the reality is that's not always the case. So if you find yourself in that situation, keep watching. I'm going to share how we can do this. One of the things I realized I had to do, I figured out real quick, was that even though we have different tastes, there are commonalities typically with what goes on on the plates. So to begin, what I started to do was find the thing that can be shared, and this is connected to things I've said before as far as find an anchor to build a meal around. It's the same concept here. I find one thing that's shared across both plates. So in this case, these two plates that I'm keep putting up here, this is dinner, this was dinner. In this case, it's the salmon. That's the shared component of the meal. I didn't need to do anything differently. I know that's the thing that's going to go on both plates. Now, it's the same ingredients basically on both plates anyway, but by starting with this shared component, that took care of a big part of it, which was the protein. And if you see my other videos, this is also the anchor. And what that means is building the meal around it. So I have the protein covered. It's shared across both plates. And then from there, what I sought to do was do what I talk about with building meals is you have components, create components for your meals, because that way what it does is it gives you options. And by that I mean the components that are going to help build your meal, you can create variations of those components. So for example, in this meal, the components are the protein, which is shared, the rice, which is also shared, it goes on both plates, but I'll show there's a slight difference. There are two types of rice. There's white rice, and then there's a quinoa brown rice blend. And then the vegetables, two types of vegetables, asparagus and mixed greens or a mixed salad. And so those are the components. You want to make sure you build components that can help build your meal. And that's where you offer the variation. So the variation here looks like that quinoa blend mixed with some of the white rice on one plate, and then you have the plain jasmine rice on the other plate. It also looks like asparagus on one plate and mixed greens on the other plate. So you see how I end up with two different plates, same meal, same dinner, two different plates, because the components that I prepared gave options or gave variations, so you could satisfy both tastes. And then to enable this, or to ensure that you can create that the components to build a variety or offer options, one of the things you have to look at is how can I collapse the work so that I'm not doing double work, or I'm not starting a whole new thing. For example, the salmon is going in the oven, the asparagus also in the oven. So what you're doing is more or less sharing the work, or let the shared work do more, if that makes sense. So baking the salmon and at the same time bake the asparagus. So that's one task in and of itself done. There's nothing else that needs to be, no more additional work that needs to be done other than when it comes to plating. The mixed greens are raw, and so that's just a matter of adding that to the plate, to one plate. So the process or the work that you do, you share as much of that work as possible to minimize how much work you end up doing. So you're not doing multiple projects. So I'm not doing the air fryer thing, I'm not doing the stove at the same time I'm doing the oven. The oven takes care of both the salmon and the asparagus. And if I was even offering another carb option, so instead of rice, let's say I was going to do potatoes, then the potatoes would have gone in the oven as well, as a way of sharing the work. So giving the work, the cooking, more, you get more bang for your buck basically. So do more with the same thing is essentially what I'm saying. And then from there, you go ahead and build the plate. So now I have a plate that I'm going to build one where the salmon goes with the white rice, and then the salad goes on next. And right here, this takes care of the needs of one person based on their preferences, because again I've given myself options. And then the second plate, building that, is the same thing. So I have the rice blend, the quinoa brown rice blend. This was simply leftovers. In fact, this is reheated rice. This is not something that was cooked fresh, and even if it was, it still would have been an additional thing. So even if I were cooking the white rice was the only thing that's going to be cooked. That quinoa blend was from a microwavable pouch that I popped in the oven for 90 seconds. And so that work was low effort, and from that was able to just add that to the white rice, mix it up, put it in this plate along with the asparagus. So you see how both plates cater to two different tastes, but it's the same dinner process. There wasn't anything extensive. There wasn't anything extra that needed to be done. It was one, looking at what we had and utilizing that, sharing, looking for what could be shared, what part of the meal could be shared or could be used as an anchor, and then building components to around that anchor. The rice was the easy thing because it was already in the fridge, prepared. It was simply a matter of reheating it. I had two rices. That's a word? Rices? Two types of rice. And just reheated them to plate it. And then the vegetables, one was raw. I just needed to add it to the plate from the fridge. And the other was also baked with the salmon. So in building these two plates, it's no different from building for one. The same process applies, but without creating extra work for myself. And so this is something that I apply, whether it's salmon, chicken, it doesn't matter. how can you collapse the time? One, what can you create that's shared across the plates? So even if you had a third plate, the same thing could have been done. And what process can you get more out of without creating an additional piece of work? So that's how you build a meal like this, or this is how you build two different plates from the same dinner without creating extra work for yourself. And I want to make sure that I have all the notes. One of the things with doing something like this is not necessarily having it all figured out, even though you have an idea. So for example, starting with the shared component, or the component that's going to be shared across the plates, is most important than what you're going to build around it. That you can figure out after. But if you prefer, you can kind of figure it out before, so that you know the direction you're going to go for each plate. Now you might change your mind as you're fixing the plate, that you might not want, say, the asparagus, then that can go for another meal. Everybody gets the mixed greens. But the idea there, or what I'm trying to get at there, is there's no fixed idea of what the final plates are going to look like, even though you have an idea of what the different parties might want. So like I said, I could have decided one plate is going to end up with more salad greens. Like my plate could have ended up with more salad greens, because I am open to eating salad greens. I didn't have to eat asparagus. Whereas the other plate, I know for a fact asparagus was not going to be eaten, and so I wouldn't have put it on that plate. But the point I'm making there is there's no fixed idea of what the final plate has to look like. I could have also replaced the salad greens with some green beans, maybe, if I had done that instead of asparagus. I could have changed my mind, instead of doing asparagus, could have done green beans. But my point is, this salmon was fixed, so we know everybody was going to have that. And that was decided on. How the plate is going to look at the end, that is something you work out as you go along. So the point there, again, is you don't have to have a fixed idea of what the meal needs to look like. You just need to start with an anchor, how you're going to build around this meal, and take it from there. Given all the tips I've given you before, every ingredient has a job. You have your protein, you have your carbs, you have your healthy fats, you have your vegetables. How can you build your meal around those things, and build your meal with those things in mind? And as long as you've surveyed what you have available, you should be able to do that. So the next time you think that you need to create two different dinners because you have separate tastes or completely opposite tastes, consider looking for the components of a meal that, one, you can share across the plates, two, the components that you can build that give options so you can meet the different tastes and preferences, and three, build a meal not necessarily with a fixed idea in mind, but be flexible enough, or make it flexible enough to still satisfy everybody. So you're not locking yourself into one specific thing and end up hating the outcome because somebody is unhappy. You are giving yourself options, but also by giving yourself the option, you are inviting, you to change. You're inviting, what's the word? What phrase I'm looking for? Flexibility, or you're giving yourself some flexibility to modify as you go along or as you build the meal. Right? So if you found this helpful and continue to find these videos helpful, go ahead and subscribe to the Weekly Dose, my weekly newsletter where I share meal ideas and nourishing insights so that you can be a better, not cook, but you can better nourish yourself through the meals you make in your kitchen.